Hi, my name is Benedict. This episode is really just showing something that I can do, anyone can do in Reason, which is much easier to do here than in most other DAWs. The most notable exception probably being Bitwig because of their grid, which is capable of very similar sort of stuff to this. For anyone who knows me, they know that I will develop VST in SynthEdit. One of the downsides of SynthEdit is that it takes time, and then you've got to export VSTs, and you've got VSTs and this, that, and the other. And sometimes that's great. Sometimes that's really the right way to do a project. But sometimes you can do as well, if not actually turn out a little better, by doing it inside Reason because of this feature. And in this case, I built a reverb. Actually, I built it twice. I built it first with Kilohearts SnapHeap and delays, and to be honest, I was very pleased with it. But then, without thinking, I sort of thought, oh, I probably can't make a faceplate like this stuff with it as easily as I want. In hindsight, I probably could have, but then I sort of thought, oh, that sounds quite nice. That's really rather cool. How would it sound if I used Ripley? Because I've done this sort of thing lots and lots of times with SynthEdit, obviously, and with the Echo. And in this case, I decided to make a reverb with a pile of Ripleys. Here's what I got. Raw sound. Turn on the reverb. Now that's a reverb I like. I'm kind of fussy about my reverbs. The reverbs that most people want them, sort of like, yeah, why? But that's a personal thing. Let's give it a slightly more complex... Oh, sorry, that would start with a simple sound. And hear how nicely it picks it up. I feel like it's sensitive to the sound as well as making more of it. And as we add in the second oscillator... Now, in no way do I spend my time with reverbs obsessing over how technically perfect they are. If they ring a little bit, that's just fine with me. The real world rings like a bell. Can you hear taps? Yeah, that's fine with me, and I actually prefer it that way when I can hear the taps. To me, that seems more like the real world, and I prefer the way the mixes sound with that. Plus, of course, I build in a lot of control for modulation, chorusy stuff, and that's a big part of this. And I must say, I really, really liked what I'd done in the Kilohearts version. Actually, let me just, seeing I can take the time and edit it out anyway, let's go through here, and it will be Kilohearts Smooth Reverb. Okay, so the other ones. So as you hear, really very similar. Turn off that second oscillator. Turn it back on. Really nice and rich. And it was a SnapHeap with a collection of things. So the sound, and you'll see me doing this again, and I'll walk through this with Ripley. There's a chorus on the beginning of this. It goes into a delay, which is set to be a pre-delay. So it simply takes the whole signal and says, you move backwards by X. And that chorused delay, the pre-delay, then feeds this collection of parallel delays. So it's not this delay going into this delay, as in they are all fed from this original source. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of those in a row, all being mixified back into here, modulated with this modulator here, the ability to control the pre-delay, the overall size. I also modulated the overall size to get this modulation. You can see that happening here. All the invisible wires, modulation rate and what have you, length being feedback, so it's a feedback that goes across to everything, and then damping because there is a tone. You can see these turn. Ooh, it's supposed to all be down. That one goes up a little bit, so obviously that guy is backwards. So probably needs to be fixed for whatever is going on with that one. They're all supposed to be a little bit, I'm not going to bother with that right now. But that's another way of doing it. And then using this to do the AB or the mix. We'll kill that guy. We don't need him. I wasn't even going to show you, but it came up. You would have seen that there was an EQ in there in the Kilohearts one. I built that in. So we can now set and control. What we want the tone of our reverb to be. And sometimes when mixing, if you feel like the core material that you've got's a little dull, and you go, oh, I'm going to have to do so much EQing in the bright end to make it work, which is going to make it sound thin or whatever. Sometimes a wise thing is quite simply to say, well, okay, where do I want this to get a bit brighter? Let's say it's here. Add a little bit of brightness. And with your mix, wouldn't always be as big a reverb as this, but you can hear how that lifts. So the brightness in the reverb actually brightens up the material as well. Just a little sort of side tip. So that's one. Now I know most people would rather hear drums. Here's one we prepared earlier. It's actually a preset. On, off. You hear it adds a lot of depth to those otherwise obviously quite flat drum samples. Nothing against the drum samples, but drum samples are flat by nature. So this adds a lot of depth to that. And it's just a preset, it's not the only preset, it's fully automatable. And then EQ. In this case, we're pulling out of a lot of body there. You can hear it sounds a little bit thick in the room. You can pull that back out. And we'll walk through and see how this works. There's my snare. Nope. Yeah. Easiest way to hear reverbs. So inside, and this is where Reason makes it incredibly easy to do without getting into the whole, like in Bitwig's grid, which the grid is great. I don't own Bitwig, but I've played around with it a lot, and it's probably where I'd go if Reason pulled up stumps and died. The great thing with this is that you end up with the ability to do anything you could do in a real-world studio without having wire and crap all over the carpet, as well as going, well, that's all right, I can use 3, 4, 5, I can use 6 delay lines without needing to own more than one of them, which is obviously a great virtual thing. It's not unique to Reason, but this makes it really, really easy. So I put it in a Combinator so that it can move easily. Excuse me whilst I move my head, that's going to be far better. Alrighty, so architecture here is the signal comes in, snare sound comes in, it's heard here, and then it's separated out. This has a pair of outputs. So if we flip around, we will see that there's the main output, there's a secondary output, which is just a straight clone of what's going out the main gate. The main output just goes straight to here. That's here, main, there. You can see that the reverb is running late, and the secondary goes to this pre-delay here. This pre-delay is using quite a few of the functions, but not a lot of the functions of Ripley. So we've got obviously our time. All of this is under control here. which is a great thing. We can build these face plates. And we've also got control over length, which is feedback. There's not a lot of feedback on the pre-delay, because you generally don't have an awful lot on your early reflections, or at least not quite the same. You can build these things to taste. If you say, oh, Benedict, that's not the way I want to do it, I want this to have, like, you can do it. So don't feel like you're tied to doing the decisions that I've made to suit the kind of room space that I would like. I deliberately didn't use this filter. You can see I was set up to use it, but I did not. A little bit of the wobbly, and our modulation is being handled here. I'm not sure whether this is actually set. No, that's preset. So this is the equivalent of that pre-delay and chorus in the Kilohearts one. The Kilohearts one, I've used 2 devices. With this, I don't need to use 2 devices. I can use the one and set up some chorusy stuff here. So that's that done. Now that then uses a splitter. Splitters! So that signal comes out of here. It gets really kind of messy with the wiring, comes out of here, goes into here, and then gets created clones. 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see them all nice and neatly named as taps 1 through 4. So there are 4 of these which are exactly the same. They don't respond to the pre-delay stuff, but this is where you set your overall size and overall length. Size being the initial delay time for each of these later things. Now I've set them so that at this point it's 50, this is 62, so each of these goes out an extended time. Now for the moment I have got them all set that they all go to minimum of 2 milliseconds at when this knob is at 0. That may not be the smartest thing, but the reality is I'm very likely not to use an awful lot here. So if I didn't want to do it that way, I could simply say in my editor here, tap 1 could be 2 to 200 milliseconds. Tap 2, rather than being 2 to 250 milliseconds, could be 5 or 10 or whatever. So it stops at the tiniest possible of all of your taps being at exactly the same point in time, because that slightly breaks the laws of a room. But I'm not worried, because I'm not worried about technicalities really, ever, because to me that's silly. So we've got our 4 taps, and then these 4 taps come back here. You can see them coming in. Level is reduced a little bit. Again, I do this by ear, by feel. And that comes out of here to a late verb. So this late tap here picks up the existing reverb, which is the proceeds of our pre-delay going through here, and then goes into this late section, which is just a whole other reverb or delay section. I shouldn't say reverb, because it's not a reverb until you hear the whole thing at once. So that's not hearing the late. That's hearing the late as all wet. Therefore, it's picked up whatever's happening here. So as you see, it's picked up whatever's happened there. Just says, okay, this is the time from that initial reverb. We're now going to set this space and then set a set of echoes on that as well. So you hear a big pre-delay as such. Here you hear the shorter reverb and then the longer reverb. So it's a way of managing your tail and what happens after, including being able to do things like this, to have a kind of happening as well, which is really very cool, because I like to be able to control a lot of my reverbs and at the same time to keep it quite simple. So that gives you a lot of versatility when you understand how it works. Each of these has an EQ, which is inside the feedback path. So every time this tap goes around, it loses X amount of high end and X amount of low end. Again, they're arbitrary amounts, and I control the high end here with a damping control. I don't get overly technical about that, because signal then comes out of our late verb and goes into this EQ, which we can turn on or off. So you're not stuck with it. If you say, oh, look, Benedict, I want to EQ this differently, or whatever, because you're going to have to make your own one of these. I'm not giving this one away unless there's overwhelming demand, especially coupled with cash. You can make your own. That's the whole idea. Then there's the ability, and most of the controls of this are cloned up here. So you can then say, okay, I really want to control my sound here. Bring out that sort of thwacky side. There we go, we can say that's what we want to do. But we want it to be kind of warm too. If necessary in this situation, you can actually control, like if you feel like your reverb has lost or gained too much level, you can finesse it here as well. It's not really that important, but it struck me that once in a while I might want to do that, so there it is. Really relatively simple to build. If you haven't done one of these before, it could take you a day or so, but that should only be the first time you do it, as you do the thinking. Now, my advice is, if you haven't done this before, is please do this. Even if you're not in Reason, you should be able to do some of this in any DAW, but obviously a DAW with modular capabilities like Reason, or as I say, Bitwig, or Moolab, I think, has a Mux thing. I don't know much about its capabilities, but in theory it should be able to do it. But don't get that they get in the way. Take this concept, but I would encourage you, to do it, because you're going to be amazed how much you learn. Don't come into this thinking, oh, well, I'm going to end up with a sound that's exactly like insert stupid name. No, you're going to end up with something unique, and you're going to know how to control it too, once you understand how to make it. My advice would be to actually draw it out. Get a pen, get a piece of paper, and actually draw signal in. Draw a line then to where it's going next. So in this case, it would be to this splitter. Signal comes in, one splitter, a block called splitter. Signal comes out. You can draw a line straight away to our mixer at the end. Signal dry. And then you can draw the other one going out to your pre-delay. So you draw a box, call it pre-delay, and then underneath that you put another splitter, and it's got 4 wires, or however many delay lines you're going to use. You'd be surprised how much reverb you can get out of a single delay line. But using a few is the whole idea here. Now remember, these are all in parallel, so your splitter will send to 1, 2, 3, and 4 all at once. Then 1, 2, 3, and 4 are coming into this mixer up here. You draw a box for that as well. You can even draw little knobby things on it so you feel special. And then that goes out to what I've called late verb. Really should have just called it late taps. And then in this case onto the EQ. So box for each of those, wires drawing it up. And then that EQ goes to our mixer down the bottom, which gets dry on one side, wet on the other, back out to DAW world. And that's how we end up with this. Now, this is immensely versatile. We can set our... We'll make this loud. Our pre-delay. Initially, we're not going to hear a lot of difference because there's small numbers here. But now you can start to hear... I've given this up to 100 milliseconds, which is generally plenty for pre-delay. If you want to get really interesting, then you can go to a couple of hundred. But... what I will do is we'll tend to work in the groove. And before you say, oh, but set it to BPM, Benedict, to be like, no, that's a really bad plan. Once I've set something that I feel works for the piece, Let's get this going again. That's how I like that. If we sat down with our calculator, we could probably work out that I'm near some kind of beat division. Anyway, but the thing is, I'm not perfectly on it, some kind of rigid, thoughtless loser. So your pre-delay sets the time before the room actually starts to come back at you. Most of the time, most people leave it really, really short, but I actually love the fact that you can actually start to groove your piece even more with your... We now set the overall size. Again, really, really short and flangey. And getting out into... Bear in mind, you can hear a rattle there. That's because of each of our taps is firing off with roughly 50 milliseconds in between. 50 milliseconds simply because that's what I chose. You could choose any number you like, but if you're wanting to get reverb type stuff, you're generally not wanting to go too large. You know, if you're giving 47 seconds between each tap, it's not achieving this kind of effect, obviously. And then we can set our length. Again, feedback at very small amounts is quite minimal, but you hear there the extra feel that gives to the sound. So this is a short reverb per se, unless we decide we want a long reverb. Obviously, if those taps are very close, and this would be a little less like this if I had set each, tap 2, 3, 4 to not start at the very beginning, giving them all an offset as well, then there'd be a little less of that. But it still is interesting. You get a certain result from this. Just turn that EQ off. And that's rather cool as it is. Let's see it straight there. Let's undo that. It's giving us that sort of slap back feel. Flat. Kind of cool. You can obviously play with your modulation. You can need to use more modulation on very, very short times just to reduce that ringing. The longer they get, the more the modulation depth will tend to take hold and it can get nasty. That's kind of cool. We can set our dampening. And then we've got this late. So that's taking our initial echo. We can either set it to quite literally pick up the first reverb and adding some sort of ringy to it, or we can go out late. And obviously, for the dubby of you, you see that you can get squishy, swishy, wibbly with it. Not that that's a purpose here. So we could say that's kind of cool what we wanted. Flat, no love in that. Now we've got an interesting sound. Obviously I'm working in headphones without any music to work to, so you can hear those extra taps echoing. You may only want the one of them. You don't even have to have any of them. If we made this longer, hear how you get this nice kind of bloom. You probably don't want that loud. Everything sounds wrong in cans, so you never ever mix delays, reverbs, that kind of stuff in cans because it's always wrong. So that allows you a lot of freedom. And of course, you can work things quite backwards. You can say, okay, no, I'm just going to have a really short thing there and then a long thing out on the other end. That's quite an unusual echo space, but it's interesting and it would be excellent in the right place, especially if you're doing dub or 80s remixy kind of stuff, or you just have a very open space in your piece and you want to do that. I was listening to Lucky Phil Collins' Groovy Kind of Love came on the radio the other day, and it was reminded as like those tambourines, like a tambourine hit, bounce, 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 and it helps fill that space tremendously. Lucky Phil was really good at using space. So this is giving you a huge amount of versatility as to what you want to do. And then obviously our EQ we can turn on and off, and we can get all kinds of creative with how we want to control our sound. We played with these before, so it's just cut and boost, 18 dB I think it is, and the frequency at which we're cutting and boosting things. This is just choosing whether it's the really broad EQ curve from the earlier SSL or the more surgical narrow one from the later SSL. So if you want to get more pointy, then we can, that's all lodged in the cutoff there. And again, we can choose how we want to manage our level. And of course, just our mixing, which means that if you're using this as a send, return, then you'd set this to 100%, so you're only hearing the echoes. So it's a very versatile device, and it's all about not saying you do this exactly, but saying you can build your own device which you know very, very well, and you'll still be surprised how much versatility you can get from it. And a unit like this, I've got lots of them, like a lot of them. I'm somewhat obsessed with building Reverb units, but every one of them manages to be a little bit different. And after a while, I know what they're good at. And so I'll tend to just grab them and drop them into when they feel like they're going to be the right thing for a track or a particular instrument. I haven't used this one yet, so I'm not going to say where I would use it per se. But, just goofing around and getting this very cool dub sort of a thing, I'd be like, yeah, that's an instrument thing. I'm not sure this is going to mix. Although I do some quite interesting reverb spaces on mixes. But, that one might be more of a instrument kind of a thing. But this great big thing here next time I'm doing a Keith Emerson brass, go and touch, touch and go, could get in trouble with that, going and touching people. Then obviously that's very instrument. Normally I use something that's a lot more diffuse, clattery on a whole mix, so I can't say how this will go for me on a long mix, but I find this a lot more exciting. I can make RV7000 sound similar to this. but I always find it personally a little flat. But it's closer to RV7000 than the normal sorts of things that I use, because the normal sort of thing that I would use, and the thing that I use the most on, the single most likely reverb that I am to use is actually this guy, which I built for higher hertz. And it was designed primarily as a multiplier, so you can take a signal. Let's go back to our single oscillator, no chorusiness. Turn this guy in. Hear how you're getting a kind of a slight chorus. And we're adding stereo spread as well. Mono, stereo. But if you add a little bit of time, a little bit of feedback, well, a lot of feedback. That's the most common sort of reverb, which is similar enough to this. Although this is brighter, but that can be changed. So this probably will end up being used on my own masters, the single reverb to rule them all, because it matches multiplier a lot and it gives me a lot more control. But with multiplier, there was never meant to be an awful lot of control here. There's far more than you need, but you largely only ever just use this. That's why all the white knobs, you can ignore the blue knobs mostly. And then if I want to control it in any other way, reverbs, what have you, EQs, etc., someone's asking me questions, children, then I would add them afterwards, whereas this got in the box. But the whole thing here is not about saying, this is my device, you've got to buy it, or this, that, and the other. It's nothing to do with that. It's not even for sale. But to show you how easy it is and what amazing results you can get. You don't need to go buy another reverb unit. If you know what you want your reverb unit to do, you can either just add that feature to your existing reverb unit by adding another device before or after. Or quite simply by saying, okay, I will take the fundamental building blocks like, say, Ripley or the Echo or whatever. I've also built reverbs out of very, very minimal do-nothing delay lines that I've made in SynthEdit and bring up here, and other functionality makes them do a whole lot of stuff. So there's lots of ways, but it's just as soon as you understand how you want to chain this together, then you can use your Combinator to make really, really interesting things. I hope that has been interesting or useful. If I can help you in any way, please contact me with one of the links below. If you have found value in this, please also pop over to my Ko-fi and give me some coins there. Thank you. Have a great day.